This program is on Women's Equality Day and is created by the Southeastern Connecticut Federation of Democratic Women. I am Elizabeth Duarte, and I am a former president of the Connecticut Federation of Democratic Women and currently now the treasurer. I'm also the corresponding secretary for the National Federation of Democratic Women. So the Federation of Democratic Women's purpose is to unite Democratic women and to promote the causes and the beliefs of the Democratic Party. So we have a local club, we have a state club, and we have a national. And if you're a member of the local club, then you're a member of the state and the national as well. So we have two members here today. We have Ashley Gillece.
Hi, I'm Ashley Gillece. I am the current president of the Southeastern Connecticut Federation of Democratic Women.
And we have Juliette Parker.
I'm Juliette Parker, and I'm currently on the Groton RTM in District 2, and I'm running for Town Council.
So, what is Women's Equality Day? Women's Equality Day is celebrated on August 26th because it celebrates the day that women were given the right to vote. It was only 97 years ago, on August 26, 1920, that the Constitution was ratified with the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. The suffrage movement began in July 1848, where hundreds of women met in Seneca Falls, New York, to discuss the rights of women, which also included the right to vote. But it took 72 years after that meeting for us to finally get the right to vote. Started with the Declaration of Sentiments, which was based on the Declaration of Independence, and it was drawn up by Elizabeth Cady Stanton at the Women's Rights Conference in Seneca Falls. The 300 women at the convention pledged to, quote, use every instrumentality within our power to effect our object. We shall employ agents, circulate tracts, petition the state and national legislatures, and endeavor to enlist the pulpit and press on our behalf. The decades that followed witnessed such pioneers as Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, Sojourner Truth, Lucy Stone, and Ida Wells Burnett, who emerged as the leaders of the suffrage movement with their strong activist activities.
The efforts were made by state to gain support for women's rights, including the right to vote. The campaign was mostly through articles in newspapers, letter writing, assembly meetings, marches, and lobbying the elected officials. After having dedicated most of their lives to the suffrage movement, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Sojourner Truth, Lucy Stone, and many other original suffragettes died before the Constitution was ratified to give women the right to vote. While there were many women involved in the women's suffrage movement, Susan B. Anthony was honored by being the first woman to be depicted on the U.S. coin. The dollar coin was minted in 1979. The women's suffrage movement was not just happening in America, it was happening in Europe as well. In Great Britain, by the early 1900s, the movement was becoming more militant. Women were protesting and were being arrested. There were massive crowds for the rallies and parades in London. This brought on more arrests, and women continued the protesting in the jail by holding hunger strikes. During this time, many women from America were in Great Britain, supporting the women's movement. Alice Paul, a social worker from New Jersey, came back to the States with information of the more militant approach. This changed the course of the suffrage movement. Marches were occurring with larger crowds. On March 3, 1913, one of the largest marches with 6,000 to 8,000 women was held the day before President Woodrow Wilson's first inauguration. The march was disrupted by angry men who stormed the march and attacked the women. The police did nothing to protect the women. Ida Wells Burnett was successfully integrated in the women's suffrage movement when she refused to walk with the other black women at the rear of the 1913 Washington, D.C. parade. Instead, she infiltrated the ranks of her white Illinois peers after the march began. Marches continued in every state in Washington, D.C. When arrests were made, women held hunger strikes in the jails.
In 1917, women began to picket in front of the White House in an attempt to get President Wilson to support their cause. These women were innocent and defenseless. However, they were jailed for picketing the White House, carrying signs asking for the vote. During their imprisonment, suffragettes slept in front of their cells in order to get more air. The women preferred the stone floors to the vile odors within their cells, which kept them nauseated. On the night of terror on November 15, 1917, 40 prison guards, wielding clubs with their warden's blessings, went on rampages against the 33 women wrongly convicted of obstructing sidewalk traffic. They beat women, chained their hands to the cell bars above their head, and left them hanging for the night, bleeding and gasping for air. The warden at the Occoquan workhouse in Virginia ordered his guards to teach a lesson to the suffragettes imprisoned there because they dared to picket Woodrow Wilson's White House for the right to vote. For weeks, the women's only water came from an open pail. Their food, all of it colorless slop, was infested with worms. During the hunger strikes, the prison guards would force feed the women. They tied them to a chair, forced a tube down their throat, and poured liquid into their mouth until they vomited.
The political men for President Wilson tried to persuade a psychiatrist to declare the leader, Alice Paul, insane so that she could be permanently institutionalized. The doctor refused. He said that Alice Paul was strong and brave, and that didn't make her crazy. The doctor told the men, courage in women is often mistaken for insanity. It was after this imprisonment and hunger strike that word got back to President Wilson, who was appalled by the treatment of the women. And finally, he turned in favor of the women's suffrage movement. So 3 years later, after that night of terror, and 72 years since Seneca Falls Convention, women finally won the right to vote. It was on August 18, 1920, that the state of Tennessee became the 36th state to ratify the amendment, which officially became part of the U.S. Constitution on August 26, 1920, as the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. So finally, women had the right to vote. So now we're 97 years later, and it's 2017.
Yes.
We have had the right to vote for only 97 years. So where are we today? Where are women today in voting and in elected office?
Well, currently here in the state of Connecticut, women only make up 24.7% of the elected officials in our state house. On the federal level, we currently only have 21 women senators.
And that's out of 100.
Out of
There's
100
senators in the country. And we have 21 women.
Yes. And as far as the House of Representatives, we currently only make up 24% of the House.
So what we're saying here is that women have to run for office, okay? We have the right to vote, and that also gave us, in voting, we also need to be running for office so that we can
put back into the community.
That's right,
have
and
our
to make
voices
the
heard.
laws that are going to make the changes that we need to have to make our life better. So, Juliette, you're running for office.
Yes.
Did you want to share about why you were running for office?
I'm running because I feel it's my calling. I always want to help in the community. I volunteer in my community. I make sure to stay in touch with everyone, and from old childhood friends to the elderly to the little children. I'm showing my community that I want to be there for you. I feel it's important that you got to put back into the community. If you don't, you just lose it. It takes a village. I remember growing up, it used to be a village. We all looked out for each other, helped each other out, and I want all of us to get back to that point again, that we're one as a group. And with everything going on now, it's going to be a difficult time, but we need to come together.
Thank you. I think, running for office is definitely a big commitment to make, but it certainly does make a difference. And you mentioned in this time, I think, I'm the oldest one sitting here, so I know the 60s and a lot of the fighting that was done back then for women's rights, for civil rights, and how many signs we see at rallies right now saying, been there, done that, why are we doing it anymore? And yet we know all of the marches that were done and how long it took for us to just get the right to vote. We had a really big march, not the day before President Trump, okay? Like Woodrow Wilson, in 1913, they had it the day before. But we had it the day after the Women's March in Washington, D.C. And Ashley, I know you went to that. Could you share about the Women's March?
Absolutely. The Women's March in D.C. was an overwhelming experience, I think, for everyone that was there. For me personally, it was an amazing opportunity for me to stand amongst 3 separate generations of family members of mine who were marching that day. We stood with my aunts who had marched back years and years ago, and who also had signs reiterating that they couldn't believe we were doing this again. But it was this amazing opportunity, too, for me to have the next generation in our family with my cousin's daughter marching alongside of us, and really show this next generation that there are so many strong women who are willing to be there that day. And I refer to it a lot of times as more of a rally than a march, for the mere factor of our numbers were so big that there are many times when we weren't actually able to move. It was gridlock. You think of gridlock with cars, but this was gridlock of human beings. Men, women, our transgender community, our LGBT brothers and sisters, people from every part of the country. We were seeing women carrying signs from Alaska. We were seeing people who'd flown in from Hawaii, people who had never been to marches or rallies. We had this energy on the streets that you just can't really describe. And it's been amazing because as we're watching moving forward since then, so many of those women have decided that wasn't enough. One march wasn't enough. And so we are now seeing so many of those individuals who came out of that march, went back to their communities, and are organizing and are standing up in ways that they never felt comfortable to do before. So I think the march was the beginning of so much more.
And that's so true, that so many people have come back to their communities, to their villages, and are taking action. What would you say the message from the March in Washington? Why so many? Well, why did you go? Maybe it's simpler just to ask. Why did you feel the need to go?
I look at where we are in society right now. I look at the constant hatred that we're seeing at every corner of our country. We're seeing it in small towns, big cities. This is a universal problem we're having across our country right now. And I felt it was important for me as a mom, as a daughter, as a member of my own town and community to be there and to really just take part and show that at the end of the day, I'm not going to be silenced. I'm going to continue to be vocal. I'm going to continue to stand up. And, I came home and I shared those pictures with my son, and that's something that I'm grateful for. It allows us the opportunity really show the next generation that we will do everything we can to fight for them to have every opportunity that we might not currently have.
Great. And thank you for going. I know there were other rallies that were around, closer, and actually there was one in Mystic that our producer Terri Roper organized in literally only a few days, and we had over 100 people there. That and then we had people on the streets of Mystic that came and joined our march and rally as well. So the definitely there was incredible energy. But then, as you said, coming back, so then we have, I don't know whether or not we thought things might get better, our president would become more presidential, but that's not happening. And we have had numerous marches and rallies and vigils since then. And I know there are different organizations that have came out of the January March and are still meeting and going on. It makes a difference, as we know it made a difference for the right to vote. We have to believe that organizing and rallying and marching can make a difference now. I think it's only appropriate to talk about that there was that night of terror 100 years ago. As you say, it's going to be a 100-year anniversary for that night of terror, and our country had another night of terror this last weekend in Charlottesville, Virginia, and it is shocking and appalling that we are going backwards like that, and that that's this hatred, of any any other group rather than a white male, isn't good enough.
Yes.
And I know that majority of people that everybody we know, is very, nobody's like that. We don't. None of us know anyone like that. Okay, but the fact that this is going on is horrifying.
Yes.
So I don't know how people are feeling about that and how that relates to what we need to do.
And I think the children now, as well as young children to teenagers, are watching this, and I think it's going to set another movement because they're not like this in school.
Right.
They don't understand why it keeps happening. I don't want my young daughters, 19 and 15, to not realize you need to be involved in order to make the change.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
One of the reasons why I'm running is to make sure that they see me doing this. You have to lead by example. And if you're not leading in your community to show everyone else how to morally, spiritually, and ethically act, then step back, move away.
I think that's a prime example of part of the problem we've seen. Our children don't have hatred in their heart as a child. How we as parents raise our children and expose them to the world is how they will grow up. So we have an opportunity right now with these young children to show them strong leadership examples like Juliette and other women leaders across our country, and to show them that we can end the hatred and the racism with them, because they can grow up to love each other and think no differently of one another.
Right.
They're not old enough right now to remember the past. They're only old enough to remember what we're currently doing and how we're currently reacting. So I think as parents, we have a huge obligation to expose them to everything to some extent that's going on so that they can end the hatred with this generation. And this is a generation growing up that can end it.
Now, and what you, in bringing up that in teaching our children, in part by what we do as example for that, and a big part of this is who we have elected.
Yes.
Who is elected? who is on our local elections,
Yes.
who's on our state elections, and who's elected nationally, because they're the ones who make the laws that makes the changes for the life that we want for our children. So I know we've been very discouraged, I think, in that we feel like we're going backwards so much, but we do have, we have elected in the state of Connecticut here, as far as our representatives and our Senate, and they have passed, I know, some bills that I will say it's the Democrats who have passed the bills that have helped women. They have tried a lot of bills to put up there that were not passed by the Republicans. They couldn't get it to pass, but because they didn't have enough of a majority. But I know that there's one in particular bill that you were very proud of, our local Democratic representatives that they put forth.
So I was really happy. One big accomplishment this year has been the Connecticut Pregnancy Protection Act, which, when you talk to a lot of individuals in the public, assume these protections were already there. But even now in 2017, we're still fighting for things like pregnancy protection and a job to go back to as women. And we had amazing support, both female Democratic leaders and our male Democratic leaders as well, several of them co-sponsoring the bill, to really show that in 2017, this cannot be a problem anymore. A woman cannot worry about losing her job or what occurs when she gets pregnant and decides to have a family.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, again, I keep going back to this on how important it is for us to be voting.
Yes.
And where we need to start. We only have 27% in Groton. I only have the Groton numbers, but 27% in the last two municipal elections, 2013 and 2015, only 27% voted in the municipal election. We have to get better at this, especially after hearing what our grandmothers and great-grandmothers did in order for us to have the right to vote. So municipal elections make a difference.
Yes.
You're running for town council. You're very active in the town of Stonington and other towns around. It makes a difference who votes and who you vote for, okay, makes a difference on a local election. And it's very important that women vote, because we all saw the picture nationally of all the men sitting around the table debating women's health care.
Yes.
So where were the women? Where were the women around that table? And it's only if we vote that we're going to get the women around the table. As far as with municipal elections, if there's another plug on why it's so important, I welcome anyone to say that.
Well, I just remind people that when we talk about what's going on in our communities, a lot of times we get hung up on the national issues and the state issues. But who we vote at municipal has great impact on other sides of it as well, because when you think about it, we don't think of Connecticut as being a state with voter suppression issues, for example. The people we vote for in municipal elections are the people who make decisions like closing polling places, which cause longer lines. Minimal access to voting is something that's done at a municipal level. We like to talk about voter suppression when it comes to people being bumped off national voter databases, but it's very infrequently that we really talk about what else we can do here locally. And that's something that affects us for years to come nationally. And that's another reason municipal elections are extremely important. I also talk about with municipal elections, we are a very growing community here in Southeastern Connecticut. We have always tried to be a very welcoming community, and I thank some of our state leaders for really promoting that and showing that we love one another and we will support one another. I think that's become very clear as we're fighting things like deportation of our undocumented. One of the things we haven't done enough on the municipal levels, though, is making sure we have ballot access in all languages that are prominent in our community. When you have a community with a large Mandarin-speaking population, we need to make sure those ballots are there, they're able to read their ballots. So these are municipal issues that we need to focus on right here and right now, because these leaders inevitably will also be the leaders that will go on and represent us at the state and federal level. So I think municipals are really the heart and soul to all of it.
Yes.
And you have to start off small in order to grow bigger.
Right.
So
That's absolutely right. So in closing, really, the most important message out of here is for women, we've only had the right to vote for 97 years. That's it. Okay? So people died fighting for this.
Yes.
People lost children because they were taken away from them by their husbands. They were beaten. They suffered greatly. Now, it's not for a guilt trip to vote. It's vote because it's good for you.
Yes.
And it's what we should do because we are citizens of our community. And if you don't vote, you can't complain.
Or make the change.
So if people are not registered, it's very easy to be able to find out if you're registered. And we'll be showing, they're showing right now, thank you, the website link to the Secretary of State's office. On the state of Connecticut, you can actually find out if you're registered. You can register online if you're not. And so we urge everyone, please, to exercise your right to vote and vote this municipal elections, November 7th.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.